Hi there. So, this is a topic I've wanted to talk about for a long time because I haven't really seen it discussed really anywhere else other than one academic article which I found, and that got me really interested in the similarities between these two movies, which I've been thinking about and mulling over for a while. I think the article that I found really nailed it with some of the key ideas in these films. So, if you want to track that down, it's called Cronenberg, Greenaway, and the Ideologies of Twinship by Alana Gomel and Stephen Weninger. And if you didn't catch that, I'll put it in the description below. So let's start with a bit about the films. Dead Ringers is the better known of the two. It's a 1988 film directed by body horror legend David Cronenberg. I've seen it called body horror, psychological thriller, psychological drama, but I'm really not too insistent on categorizing films like that. I guess I personally think of it as highbrow body horror. We've got big name Jeremy Irons doing a Parent Trap style performance as his own twin, and he does a great job. The second film, which I think it's safe to say is a little more obscure, is A Z and Two Noughts, which was released 3 years earlier in 1985. I'll be calling it Zoo just for brevity. It was written and directed by Peter Greenaway. Weirdly, IMDb and Wikipedia want to categorize it as comedy and drama, but I think most people watching this for comedy and drama would be pretty disappointed. For me, it's pretty firmly art house. If there's comedy, it's the dry, ironic kind, and the characters are more like allegorical set pieces than dramatic figures, so I thought that was a bit of a bizarre categorization personally. Before we get into specific themes and motifs and about why I think these films are spiritually connected, let's go over the basic plot lines. This is also where I warn you that I'm going to mention spoilers, so I'm hoping if you're watching, you've already seen the movies or you don't really care about spoilers. Dead Ringers is about twins Beverly and Elliot Mantle, who are big shot gynecologists. It draws inspiration from a real case involving twin gynecologists Cyril and Stuart Marcus. Like the twins in Dead Ringers, they went on a downward spiral and died in their apartment. They were barbiturate users, and according to Wikipedia, Stuart died first from an overdose, then Cyril died days later. Now, I wanted to mention that for context, but I won't be talking about the Marcus case much because it isn't really relevant as far as comparing the two films. Z, as far as I can tell, isn't referencing the Marcus twins or any real case. So Dead Ringers traces the trajectory of the twins from their childhood as nerdy kids obsessed with anatomy to brilliant college students, and finally to rich gynecologists with their own practice. And it shows how they operate, sometimes literally, as a single unit. They switch identities at work, something that the real-life Marcus twins were also accused of doing, as well as with their lovers. The twins start seeing an actress called Claire Neveu, and Beverly falls in love with her. Their perfect system starts to unravel because Bev doesn't want to share anymore. Claire catches on to their game and is understandably disgusted. The rest is a downward spiral, mostly on Beverly's part. He starts getting drunk, taking drugs, and generally going off the rails, including commissioning a metalsmith to make alien-looking tools for operating on quote-unquote mutant women. Elliot becomes a heavier drug user as well and is dragged into Beverly's spiral. They end up having to close their practice and hole up in their apartment, taking drugs, and Beverly kills Elliot with one of the tools, and later goes back to the apartment to die in Elliot's arms. Zoo is also about twins, which is technically a spoiler because we start out believing they're just brothers, but it's later revealed that they were conjoined twins separated at birth. The twins in Zoo are animal behaviorists, Oswald and Oliver, the two O's in Zoo, who work in a zoo, and at the start of the movie, their wives are killed in a car accident. The woman driving the car, Alba Buick, survives and has to have a leg amputated. The twins process their grief in various ways. One of them obsessively watches David Attenborough's Life on Earth, and the other sets up time lapses of plants and eventually animals decomposing. My read on that is that one is trying to figure out how life started and the other is trying to figure out how it ends. So they're kind of trying to come to grips with mortality between the two of them. They both get into a relationship with Alba. Meanwhile, a surgeon is trying to turn Alba into a Vermeer painting and ends up amputating her healthy remaining leg. Alba gets pregnant by the twins and has twin babies, but she doesn't want the twins to be the legal fathers because they've been fired from their job and their grief has made them unreliable. She decides to commit suicide and offers her corpse to the twins as a final time lapse. But after she's dead, the legless man who she decided should be her kid's legal father doesn't let them take her body. So the twins decide to commit suicide and set up a camera to film a time-lapse of their bodies at a place called L'Escargot, where Alba grew up, and where there are a ton of snails. But shortly after they die, the snails overrun the place and short the electronics, so everything shuts down. And honestly, that doesn't sum up everything because there's a lot going on in this movie, but that's essentially the main storyline. An obvious connection between these two films is that they deal with the concept of conjoined twins. Although the Mantle twins aren't physically conjoined twins are a big motif in the film. Bev and Elliot talk about the conjoined twins Chang and Eng. There's the horror dream sequence where the twins are shown to be conjoined. And although Beverly says his tools are designed for operating on mutant women, he later tells Claire that they're tools for separating Siamese twins. Throughout the film, the twins become more and more separated until finally one kills the other. On the other hand, in Zoo, the twins were physically conjoined at birth, and throughout the film, they grow closer together, starting to dress the same, do things as if they're conjoined, and even getting a suit commissioned that physically joins their bodies. And then they commit suicide at the same time, side by side. So in a way, the films have opposite trajectories, but they end up in the same place. Additionally, in both cases, the twins have a sexual relationship with a woman. Although in Dead Ringers, it's a big turning point when Bev falls in love with Claire. Whereas in Zoo, there isn't really an issue with one twin loving Alba more than the other. They just kind of have this kinky three-way and it's fine. In both films, there is that element of men bonding through a woman in an explicitly erotic context. But an important difference is that in Dead Ringers, the woman is the catalyst that tears the twins apart. But in Zoo, it's through Alba that the twins end up admitting that they're conjoined, and their obsession with becoming rejoined begins after that. Now, aside from these striking similarities of conjoined twins and the woman that brings them together, or maybe tears them apart, I think these films are also connected by two key themes. A pair of twin themes, maybe. So the first is men failing to understand and control women. And the second is the triumph of chaos, mutation, and monstrosity. Or the triumph of the Dionysian over the Apollonian in nature. And I'll explain that in more detail in a minute. This first theme is really evident in Dead Ringers. I would say that Dead Ringers is at its heart a film about gender and about misogyny. From the very start of the film, the Mantle brothers are trying to grapple with the idea of the opposite sex. They talk about how fish reproduce without having to touch each other. They get rejected by a neighbor girl when they ask her if she'll have sex with them in their bathtub. And then the next shot is them playing with a surgical model, saying they're going to do intraovular surgery on it. So from the start, we get the idea that they're trying to comprehend women through a scientific framework. They can't come to terms with the women in their real life, but they've constructed a system where they have the upper hand over women, both sexually and professionally. In their personal lives, they share girlfriends without those women knowing, and professionally, they make a lot of money off of correcting women's bodies, so to speak. And that's not a comment on the medical field of gynecology, but I think in this movie, it functions as a symbol of misogyny or just control over women. And David Cronenberg makes that pretty clear by starting the movie off with opening credits that just have pictures of archaic gynecological instruments that look like torture devices, and then reinforces that with Bev manufacturing literal torture device versions of gynecological instruments. Zoo is less obvious with this theme, I think, but it is still very much there. With the twins, there is very much that cold, masculine, analytical drive, but instead of trying to get to the bare-bone facts of women, it's more like they're trying to get to the bare-bone facts of life in general. But then at the very end, they ask for Alba's body, which they're denied. In both movies, there's this central triangle of the two twins and the one woman. And in the end of both movies, they don't get the woman and they're left alone in their mutually assured self-destruction. In both cases, the woman in question has a notable asymmetry that's important to the plot. With Claire, it's her trifurcate uterus. With Alba, it's her one leg. And the woman is also, in both cases, literally bringing an imbalance to the twins' system of perfect sameness and balance. In the Gomel and Weninger article, they argue that the twins in these movies represent this idealized relationship of asexual sameness. And then the woman comes into this relationship representing sexual difference, and this throws everything out of balance. And I'll get more into that in a minute. In Zoo, there is this notable subplot where a surgeon is trying to amputate Alba's other leg, which he does, and he also tries to turn her into various Vermeer paintings, which is a more literal example of controlling women and trying to reshape them. But neither Van Meegeren nor the twins manage to control Alba in the end, and she chooses to commit suicide. So I think both of these films are to some degree about men trying to control women in various ways and eventually failing. And that also ties into the next theme, which is, I think, the most important overarching theme for both of these movies, which is the triumph of chaos and mutation over order and logic. Or if not the triumph, then at least the essential importance of the former. You could also think of it as the importance of the Dionysian principle in nature. So the Dionysian and Apollonian dichotomy is a concept popularized by Nietzsche where Apollo represents order, harmony, and rationality, and Dionysus is the opposite, representing chaos, irrationality, and pleasure. Apollo also represents individuation, while Dionysus represents the dissolution of boundaries and the loss of self. Nietzsche applied this dichotomy to art and specifically to Greek tragedies, and I think it can be applied to both of these movies in an interesting way. In both films, the twins at the heart of the story are this great double-edged symbol of the Dionysian and the Apollonian because they represent both orderly sameness and chaotic difference. Because on the one hand, identical twins are, obviously, genetically identical. Gomel and Weninger argue that twinship has this historical shadow of eugenics and specifically Mengeler's twin experiments. So in that sense, they represent the symbolic economy of the same, to quote them, and the dangers of right-wing biology, which you can extend to the idea of genetic engineering and cloning to create a genetically perfect race. But on the other hand, being a twin is also a kind of mutation, and specifically, conjoined twins were a standard freak show attraction. Also, regarding the idea of Apollonian individuation versus Dionysian loss of self, the twins again represent both, because on the one hand, they view themselves in both movies as quite an isolated unit, and they really cut themselves off from everyone. But on the other hand, they also lose their discrete identities and merge into one another. So my take is that in both films, the twins at the start appear as separate agents who are kind of perfect copies of each other and working in this high-functioning Apollonian analytical system. But further into the films, you find out that the twins are either literally conjoined or metaphorically or even metaphysically conjoined. So basically, the twins are shown to be freaks all along, and the films expose their imperfection and Dionysian nature. Their seemingly perfect system breaks down when you introduce variation because the system isn't flexible, and they've tried to eliminate the Dionysian impulse, so it's vulnerable to collapse because, unlike nature, it can't adapt. And the system isn't just shown collapsing, it's shown backfiring. So in Zoo, the twins end up being their own science project, set up to die and decay in front of the camera, and then even the camera breaks. And in Dead Ringers, they end up losing their jobs and relationships, and they themselves end up in the gynecological chair and using the instruments on each other. To quote Gomel and Weninger, in Dead Ringers, the sons of Zeus splay themselves in the gynecological chair, which, in their economy of the same, represents difference, contingency, and corporeality. The monstrosity of Claire and other women in Dead Ringers should be read not as an expression of misogyny, but its very subversion. Monstrosity is life, purity and perfection are sterility and death. I think that last sentence sums it up really well. In doing research for this video, I did read some interesting stuff about other readings of Z and Two Noughts specifically, like Bataille's slaughterhouse versus museum concept, and how the zoo in Z and Two Noughts represents that. I've linked the article below if you want to chase that up, but let me know if you have any other hot takes about these movies. I would love to hear them. By the way, for anyone that's made it this far, if you are a subscriber of mine from back in the day and sort of wondered where I dropped off to for the last however many years, I think it's been like 3 years since I last released a video. Look, life's just been a bit crazy. I got a Bachelor of Science and then I did my honors, and then this year I got married. So it's been a little crazy and I've been very distracted, but I have been wanting to make this video for a long time. So it's been good to finally sit down and get all my thoughts out. Hopefully you liked it. And if you're new to my channel, consider checking out my other movie videos. This one was more of a serious analysis than I've done previously, and I would like to do more like this, so stick around if you found this interesting. Thanks for listening. See you later.